The woman in the photo with different men, I recognized my wife by the mole on her private part and realized that she was A. I was buried under a heap of new research data, meticulously sifting through the dull yet essential work for my Team S quarterly project on the prototype aircraft. Though monotonous, I carefully organized and analyzed the data for review. In the middle of this task, my phone buzzed with a text notification. At first I ignored it, unconcerned about who the sender might be. Curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I glanced at my phone. The message was from an unknown number with a local area code. Initially, I assumed it was spam, but something made me pause. When I opened the message, my confusion turned to shock. The explicit image of a woman's private parts accompanied by the text, "Take a good look. There is still time. 4 p.m. caught me off guard." At first, I dismissed it as a misdirected solicitation attempt. However, upon closer inspection, I noticed a tiny mole near the woman's private parts that matched one my wife, Rachel, had. Fear and doubt surged through me as I tried to convince myself it wasn't true. Rachel was supposed to be on her way to Seattle for an important work trip, but this image suggested otherwise. The timing of the message conflicted with Rachel's scheduled landing in Seattle at 1:30 p.m. While she usually checked in upon arrival, it was plausible she was busy with her team. Despite my rising anxiety, I decided to reply to the text before taking any other action. I typed, "Not very original, but completely predictable. Who is this? How did you get this image? Am I supposed to meet you at Jake S?" I then resolved to head to Jake S for answers. I texted Rachel, "How was your flight? I am going out for a bite. Call me when you're free," trying to remain calm while gathering information discreetly. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed again. Assuming it was Rachel, I checked it only to find another message from the mystery sender, "I'll be there. But I'm sure you will find someone more interesting than me." Feeling a mix of dread and urgency, I hurried to my car and checked the map on my phone. Jake S was 20 minutes away, and it was already 2:40 p.m. ID arrived shortly after 3:0 p.m. Unsure of the timing S significance, but hoping not to miss whoever the texter wanted me to meet. During the drive, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Rachel Crazy Day with the team. "I'll call you later tonight. Love you." I pushed thoughts of our conversation aside, focusing on the meeting at Jake S and the mystery surrounding the texter. Knowing my wife was supposed to arrive in Seattle at 1:12 p.m., my heart raced as I parked. The texter hadn't given any clues about who to look for, so I assumed whoever wanted to meet me would know me and approach me. Yet the mention of someone more interesting bothered me most. The texter seemed to have information I didn't, and I feared walking into a trap. The image of my wife's private parts left me in turmoil. I had trusted her completely, believing our relationship was fulfilling, but the only explanation for someone having such an image was deeply troubling, and I was minutes away from confronting a reality I dreaded. Stepping inside Jake S, I let my eyes adjust to the dim lighting. Unfamiliar with the bar's layout, I paused by the entrance to scan the surroundings. Ahead was a spacious dining area with a bar to my left. Choosing a seat near the end of the bar, I ordered a draft beer and continued to survey the area. My attention was drawn to a man who had just taken his drink order and was heading towards a table of smiling people. And there, at the table, receiving a drink from the well-dressed man, sat Rachel, wearing a stylish red dress and a pearl necklace, her smile radiant. I moved mechanically, advancing towards the table where Rachel sat. As I got closer, her expression changed from a warm smile to wide-eyed fear. Undeterred, I reached the table and grabbed a handful of the well-dressed man's hair with my left hand, yanking him back forcefully. The man dropped his drinks and stumbled backward, yelping in pain. I pulled him past and released my grip, intending to strike him with my right hand, but his quick retreat left me out of range, causing him to land on the floor. Taking a step towards him, I recognized Stephen and sternly warned him to stay down. Stephen, disheveled and soaked in drink, obeyed without a word. Turning back to Rachel, I saw the table had fallen silent. Familiar faces stared back at me, members of Rachel's team who had shared meals and gatherings at our home. I hoped that team loyalty outweighed betrayal, except for the one who had revealed the truth. Briefly considering identifying the informant, I dismissed the idea as futile. I told Rachel I was going home and suggested that if there was any hope for our marriage, she should come with me now. Rachel nodded, but before she could rise, I gestured for her to wait and requested a moment. I addressed Olivia and Jack seated nearby. I asked Olivia if Michael thought she was in Seattle, and Jack if Claire believed the same. Their avoidance confirmed my suspicions. I pondered whether the whole team was involved, realizing that at least one of them was. The drive home was a blur, ending abruptly in my driveway. Inside, I grabbed a beer and sank into the living room, contemplating my acquaintances. I knew Michael Lawson and Claire Morgan, but the other couples were strangers. With uncertainty gnawing at me, I considered contacting Jack or Claire, but decided against it. Instead of pursuing further investigation myself, I sent a brief message to our friends just heard Rachel S. travel plans changed. You might want to touch base on that. I left the choice of what to do next in their hands, feeling a small sense of closure amidst the chaos. Roughly 20 minutes later, I heard the garage door open and Rachel pull into the driveway. I stayed in the living room, waiting. She walked in, still in her stylish red dress, but without the provocative heels and jewelry. Calmly, she took a seat opposite me on the sofa. I stayed quiet, knowing the power of silence. I was determined to let it stretch as long as needed. Eventually, Rachel broke the silence, trying to explain that it wasn't what I thought. I cut her off, telling her she had no idea what I was thinking and that I didn't need an elaborate explanation. We both knew there was no real answer to why it was just a way to justify bad decisions. I asked her how long it had been going on, how many times, and who else knew about it. I demanded to know if I was known as the betrayed husband among her colleagues and our friends. Rachel denied it, saying it wasn't like that at all. She explained that their Team S travel plans got disrupted, and instead of coming home only to travel again tomorrow, Stephen had suggested they stay in town for a down day before resuming. I asked about the rest of the team, pointing out that I didn't see everyone there. She admitted that some of the team chose to stay home one more night and meet at the airport the next day. But I pointed out that she chose to lie to me. She seemed quite close to Stephen, so I pressed her on whether there was something going on between them. Rachel tried to deflect, saying Stephen was all right and even convinced the owners at Jake S. not to press charges. I stared at her in disbelief, telling her I couldn't care less about her colleague. If Stephen hadn't tripped, I would have hit him. Whether charges were pressed or not didn't matter to me. ID spent a night in jail before it was no big deal. Besides, it could make for interesting testimony. I asked her if she loved Stephen. Rachel paused, clearly gathering her thoughts. She finally said Stephen was not her boyfriend and there was nothing between them. She admitted she should have told me about the change in plans, but thought it was insignificant whether she was in town or in Seattle. She said I wasn't expecting her, and she was still committed to the team. They were just having dinner before heading to their rooms. There was no reason for me to act the way I did, she claimed. She said I humiliated her in front of her team. I unlocked my phone, pulled up the text, and slid it across the coffee table to her. Her face fell as she recognized the image. There was no denying it this time. I told her our team was very close-knit, and most of us had a small group that met regularly. They were all at Jake S. We were the ones putting in extra effort for the proposal. I didn't know exactly when it began, but it was sometime after Stephen became PM. We worked closely together, and I was drawn to him. Things just evolved, she explained, her voice lacking the bravado from before. I interrupted her, saying no explanations were needed. Falling into bed, doesn't it just happen? Decisions are made consciously. We both knew that, so I asked her not to insult me. I guessed it had been almost 6 months since Stephen joined. I asked if the whole team was involved, and she confirmed it. Stephen said it fostered trust and team unity, she added, asserting confidently that she felt a strong connection to Stephen and her team more than ever. I warned her that she might see some changes in her team soon. Rachel gasped, asking what I had done. I told her I couldn't stay silent and be complicit. I cared about Jack and Claire more than Olivia and Michael right now. I texted them about the changed plans. How they handled it with their spouses was up to them. I could live with my decision. Rachel practically yelled at me, saying they had the most productive team in the company's history and that I had benefited too. Just because their team meetings were on Fridays didn't mean I missed out. She never denied me access to her whenever I needed it. So, she had slept with her team. Big deal, I never noticed. The picture I showed her was taken right after Stephen finished inside her. She sneered, adding that what I didn't see was Olivia taking the picture just before going down on her. So now I knew. I never had seconds or tasted another man-'s seed. If I didn't know, it didn't happen, right? I listened in shock as the extent of the deception and my own ignorance unfolded before me. Just because I was aware and my fragile ego was bruised, she accused me of wanting to throw away all that her team and she had achieved. Rachel's anger escalated as she hissed at me. My heart rate rose as she passionately defended her team as questionable dynamic. My own anger grew by the second. For a fleeting moment during my drive home from Jake S., I had entertained the idea of forgiving Stephen just this once. However, that notion quickly met its demise. I didn't need to hear anymore, and I certainly didn't want to, but Rachel persisted. She shouted that they wouldn't have let me off the hook. I was going to text Jack and Claire back, informing them that I heard from her and that they were stranded in Phoenix but had reservations for the morning. That was the story. Olivia and Michael would stick to it, and I was going to back them up. There were millions on the line with this deal, and my hurt feelings meant absolutely nothing. She demanded I send the text, and then we could discuss our next steps. I retorted that there was nothing to discuss. She was leaving now. She and her twisted team, including her ringleader Stephen, could continue however they liked. We were done. I would be contacting a lawyer that week to start the divorce. It was a straightforward 50-50 split. She could keep her retirement, and I would keep mine. I told her to go on and use her reservations in town, head off to Seattle and chalk up another victory for her and her team. Rachel pleaded with me to send those texts, her tone softening. If they lost Olivia or Michael before the presentation, the company could lose millions. We could miss out on tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. She implored me to think about all the places we could go with that money, just the two of us. She begged me to forget about this and reclaim her loyalty. She didn't want some irrational concern about meaningless encounters to derail us. Stephen had told her she was on the fast track to executive status. All she had to do was keep delivering results for a few more years. She asked if I didn't want that for her, for us. I managed to tell her to just leave before I was struck hard in the back, knocking the wind out of me. I fell to the floor, gasping for air with a knee pressing into my back. Rachel interjected, telling Stephen not to hurt me too much. Undecided about breaking my nose, Stephen taunted me, leaning in close to my face while I lay pinned on the floor. I thought Rachel must have set me up. Now I knew whose side she was really on. Stephen sneered that we would see whose nose got broken. He ordered someone to get my phone and type those texts for me, saying they didn't have time for this nonsense. Someone yanked me up from the floor, just one person. I feigned injury, causing the person behind me to exert extra effort to help me stand. This provided me with vital information my captor was a weak office worker, already wheezing from the effort. I focused on catching my breath and refocusing on the situation. Unlike Stephen and his team of polished salespeople, my team operated in the field with the 200th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, SOAR, based in Fort Hood, Texas. My group of engineers, while not as elite, spent time with these crews during test missions. This camaraderie led to us being invited to improve our physical conditioning under the guidance of seasoned soldiers. We designed the equipment needed to access and exit hazardous locations, taking pride in our modifications that contributed to successful missions and the safe return of everyone involved. One man stood out among the 200th Master Sergeant David Wright. Renowned within his community, everyone from recruits to high-ranking officers respected him for guiding his men through global missions, known for never leaving anyone behind. His reputation was solidified during a mission in Nicaragua when the FARC ambushed their group. Sergeant Wright noticed the young LT platoon leader performing well until he saw him on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. The medic declared the LT was dead, but Sergeant Wright lifted him into a fireman-esque carry. When the medic reiterated the LT was gone, Sergeant Wright responded, "That might be true, but he is still coming home with us." Despite the more than 10-kilometer trek through dense forest back to the LZ, they managed to return unscathed, carrying the LT. Upon their return, the medic informed the doctor that the LT had died, but the doctor, using a pen light, confirmed the LT was alive. Sergeant Wright's actions became legendary. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone listened. He was a relic in an age of convenience and disposability, meticulously crafted and unique, holding a special regard for my team and me. During downtime between missions, Sergeant Wright taught us basic hand-to-hand defensive techniques. It's just better to know something just in case. I understand the biggest threat you are likely to face is a malfunctioning copier or a nasty paper cut. But if you remain in this line of work, you may find yourself in some colorful locations. If you encounter one of the local colorful inhabitants, you will have something practical to rely on, he explained. But let's hope a paper cut remains the scariest thing you ever face. I regulated my breathing and allowed myself to appear subdued in my captor-S grasp while recalling the techniques taught by Sergeant Wright. There might be times when you feel powerless and can only endure the beating. It is unfortunate, but it happens. The key is to remember that even when you are taking a beating, you can still fight back. You just have to outsmart your attacker. I remembered the lesson and subtly resisted, gradually wearing down the lone man's strength. Stephen demanded my phone, glaring at me. He taunted me, saying I now knew he had been with my wife and that every guy on the team had had their way with her. He told me to forget the tough guy act, calling me a weak, submissive nerd. He said if I did as they said, maybe I'd still have a chance with Rachel when the team wasn't using her. He mocked me, saying I could afford luxuries with her bonus, which should ease the pain. He even suggested Rachel might buy me a robot for the time she was busy. I bit my tongue, trying to control my rage as Stephen demanded to know where my phone was. Spotting the outline in my shirt pocket, he reached for it with his right hand. In one swift motion, I stepped back with my right heel, striking my captor-S shin and causing him to stumble in pain. Flexing my arms, I broke free from his hold as he yelped and collapsed under his own weight. Stephen's eyes widened in recognition as I rolled my shoulder just as Master Sergeant Wright had taught me and drove my clenched fist into the center of Stephen's face with full force. I felt the bones shatter beneath my fist as a gush of blood poured from his nose, sending him crashing to the floor. Turning around to see who had attacked me, I saw Michael lying on the floor in tears, clutching his leg and whimpering that he thought his foot was broken. I forcefully stomped on his foot, causing Michael to scream in agony. "That should clear up any uncertainty," I remarked coldly. I turned my attention back to Stephen, who was on the floor with his hands covering his face, trying to rise to his knees. Approaching him, I leaned in close to his ear and said it looked like his nose had taken the punch. Not willing to take one for the team, was he? Then I delivered a powerful punch to Stephen's temple, knocking him out cold. My adrenaline was pumping and my breath was ragged as I scanned the living room for Rachel. Suddenly, I felt a sharp impact on my back and neck, dropping me to one knee. I spun around to confront my new attacker and saw Rachel standing there, wielding a cast-iron skillet. Her swing had missed, grazing my side. Rising to my feet, I roughly grabbed the pan from her hand. Rachel pleaded with me, saying we could still salvage this. She wanted me to think about the money we would be giving up. She promised to end the affairs and cut them off. We could go back to how things were between us. Rubbing the back of my head with my left hand, I stared at her, astonished by her sudden transformation. She reminded me of the shape-shifting alien in John Carpenter's The Thing, adapting to each new challenge. Misinterpreting my smile as agreement, Rachel moved to embrace me. I held her back with my left hand and, after a brief moment of consideration, swiftly struck her nose with my right hand, fracturing the bone but not rendering her unconscious. Rachel cried out and slumped to the floor. Rachel cried out and slumped to the floor, clutching her nose in pain, watching her face contort in agony. She looked up at me with a mix of disbelief and desperation, questioning why I had hit her. I remained unapologetic, stating bluntly that I did it because I could. Still recording the incident on my phone, I felt a grim satisfaction knowing I had enough evidence to justify my actions, despite how it might portray me. Reflecting on Master Sergeant Wright's advice about decisive action, I scanned the room. Michael was groaning on the floor, and Rachel was trying to stop the bleeding from her nose while the others watched in stunned silence. I credited Sergeant Wright for the effectiveness of my actions. Turning back to the aftermath, I voiced my frustration about the consequences for Stephen and Michael, lamenting the missed opportunities and potential financial losses. Though tempted to call the police, I decided to delay that step to question Rachel further. Kneeling beside her, I showed her how to address her nosebleed. As the adrenaline rush faded, I felt a wave of exhaustion. Sitting across from Rachel, the woman I thought I knew, I pressed her for answers. I asked what she had been thinking, expressing my disappointment that becoming a vice president was worth all this. Rachel admitted that it could have been, if I had gone along with her plans. I questioned her about the future of our relationship and the likelihood of continued deceit. Rachel acknowledged that deceit might continue. She explained that Stephen had warned her about my rigid ethics and idealistic views, and that she needed to break free from my influence to achieve success. I asked when Stephen gave her this advice, my voice cold. She retorted that I had no idea about her relationship with Stephen. Following my suggestions for career enhancement had yielded only a few commendations. It wasn't TT until Olivia offered guidance that she learned what truly worked for women in the workplace. Engaging in carnal relationships for career advancement was not only effective, but also enjoyable. Still recording, I processed this information, curious about the timeline of Rachel S. actions. I asked if her involvement in these activities began before Stephen entered the picture. Rachel, expressing impatience, disclosed that she initiated these actions at the company's Christmas party a year after joining and had been committed to this approach ever since. Incredulously, I asked if she was sleeping with the boss too, William Harrison. She confirmed it, saying it didn't cost her anything to share some closeness. It was easy to manipulate men when she could lead them around by their desires, especially me. Show a bit of cleavage and she could guide me wherever she needed. Even now, thinking I had it all figured out, she continued with a smug smile on her face. They had informed William of their location when they headed here. Right now, he was gathering the rest of the team, crafting a cover story for their absence. They would have to make the pitch without them, but the extra effort with their purchases manager should pay off. I wondered if I really wanted to hear this. Oh, what the heck, why not? I prodded about the extra effort, acknowledging she was always a go-getter. She laughed, saying it was so easy she hated to even call it effort. She referred to the old joke, the worst sex she ever had was great. At the conference, it was straightforward with the men. Brenda, the token woman on the selection board, required some extra effort to win over. It's ironic that she could even seduce a woman, but she had to bring Stephen into the mix for good measure. Brenda was curious about women, at least temporarily, and that curiosity vanished around the time Rachel started making her promises with her tongue. Once they began working together after securing the contract, they had the selection board under control. They were resorting to all this if everything was set. The heavy-handed tactics. Rachel said that was Stephen's bright idea. She told him to back off, that she'd come home, take care of me, and still catch the flight. But no, he had to act like an alpha male, and look where that got them. Now, instead of celebrating their victory, she was stuck dealing with William. As she said, it was fixed, but it was going to set her back. I remarked that she wouldn't have been able to buy me off so easily. Maybe not, she replied, but she still would have made the flight. I shot back that she was definitely not making that flight now. Recalling how Stephen seemed so informed, I suspected Rachel had a transmitter. I demanded if William was listening, stating I was about to call the cops. I was certain we were looking at several felonies here, and we hadn't even touched on the fraud. This was a federal contract, right? Yeah, the feds didn't look kindly on extra effort. I was sure William had excellent lawyers, but maybe there was another way. I let the words linger. Rachel's phone rang with hail to the chief. William answered, and Rachel put him on speaker. William apologized, saying Stephen's actions were a gross lapse in judgment, assuring the board would handle him appropriately. I thanked William, saying it was reassuring to know he and the board took assault and fraud seriously. William continued, saying these were unfortunate allegations. Lawyers would get involved, but nobody wanted to rock the boat. They might pay a fine, Stephen and Michael could get community service. Ultimately, though, I would end up divorced and half as wealthy. I asked if there was an alternative here. William acknowledged that Rachel always said I was the clever one, and he was glad they hired her. He continued, saying there was an alternative. CR had replaced me in my wife's affections, and when I found out and confronted her, I was treated poorly. Shocking, I interjected. William pressed on, suggesting instead of calling the cops, how about we come to an agreement? He just sent a snap to Rachel's phone. One of his tech guys sent it should disappear after viewing. He told me to have a look, it might restore some goodwill. Rachel opened the snap and showed it to me. I saw a bank in the Cayman Islands and a very large number. I asked when that would be deposited. William replied it was already there. He said I'd find an email with the account number. This had been a terrible day for me. He understood the emotion involved. Rachel was a very desirable woman, but emotions didn't pay the bills, did they? I agreed, mimicking William S. clipped aristocratic tone. CR would cover the cost of my divorce. I couldn't reconcile that was clear. Rachel would file. She'd take her personal belongings and retirement. I paused to weigh my options. I could stand on principle and expose everything, letting the chips fall where they may, or I could walk away. William had given me 5 million reasons to choose the latter. I asked if CR had a medical team. William confirmed they had physicians on retainer. Good, I said. Send a few over here in a limo to pick up the team. Were we in agreement? Precisely, William echoed. Were we done? I asked. Goodbye, William, I said, ending the call. I pocketed my phone and turned off the recording app. Rachel attempted her most charming smile, saying she knew I'd see it their way. She suggested we could still be friends with benefits once this was over. But even her bright smile couldn't hide her bruised, bloodied face. Her eyes were blackening and dried blood was crusted around her nose and chin. I found the sight amusing and allowed myself a grin. Misinterpreting my smile, Rachel leaned in to kiss me. I raised my hand to stop her, gently pushing her back until she fell onto the couch. My expression turned disdainful as I questioned why I'd ever want to kiss her. Leaving Rachel hurt and looking up at me, I declared my decision. I told her to take whatever she wanted by tomorrow. As I walked to the door, I paused beside Michael and asked about his foot. Ignoring Michael's complaints, I kicked him in the groin, making Michael curl up in pain. Approaching Stephen, who had managed to sit up, I assured him I wouldn't hurt him. Stephen's relieved smile quickly vanished when I pressed my foot into Stephen's groin. Writhing in pain, Stephen watched as I left the room. I climbed into my car with no clear destination in mind, but the immediate needs of food and shelter loomed large. I stopped at a drive-thru for a burger and then checked into a roadside motel just outside of town near the freeway. Sleep claimed me as soon as my head hit the pillow, exhaustion overriding the physical pains from my various injuries. The next morning, I reluctantly dragged myself out of bed at dawn. As I brewed a pot of motel room coffee, my phone buzzed with a text message. Eagerly, I picked it up and read the message from an unfamiliar number. Sorry about yesterday. Can we meet at Nick S. at the mall? I'll wave you over to the bar. Ben, I replied, pouring the tepid coffee into a paper cup, that I'd be there. Determined to get things in order, I set up my laptop for some online banking. Reflecting on my college days, I recalled my economics professor S. sage advice to keep an offshore account for emergencies. With my Professor S. assistance, I had set up a bank account in the Cayman Islands, my go-to-hell fund. Over the years, I had diligently saved, amassing close to $30,000. Feeling a rare sense of pride, I knew my fund was about to get a substantial boost. Logging into the secure banking site, I transferred the bulk of the payment into my personal account, leaving $50,000 in the original account. After a quick shower and change of clothes, I headed out to meet the mysterious texter. Arriving at Nick S. just past noon, I spotted a man waving at me from the bar. The man, around my age, was well-dressed and had a friendly demeanor. I approached and took a seat. The man began apologizing for how things turned out, explaining there wasn't an easy way to break the news to me. I asked him to start with who he was and his connection to Rachel. He explained that he was part of the team. After 8 years in the Army, he was wounded and medically discharged. He joined CR about 6 months ago and was assigned to Stephen S. team 3 months ago. While talking to a friend about the job, he mentioned working for Rachel. When he asked for her full name, they realized they had a mutual friend. The friend asked him to look out for her. Initially, everything was fine, but about 2 months in, Rachel made her move. She was very attractive and persuasive, but when he asked about her ring, she just smiled and said I was okay with it. He wasn't T and told her so. That ass when the trouble started. After rejecting her, he got all the worst assignments and constant grief from Stephen. He called their mutual friend and told him what happened. The friend said it didn't sound like me to pimp out my wife and that I needed to know. Stephen sent him a photo as an incentive to join the team, kind of a reward if he went along. He didn't agree with their methods and resigned yesterday. That ass when he sent me the text. I asked about their mutual friend, and he confirmed it was David Wright. He said if it weren't T for David, let us just say he got him out of a tough spot when he was a rookie. He owed him. We both did. I acknowledged that. I asked what he was going to do now. William had laid it out for me. I could involve the cops, and sure, Michael, Stephen, and Rachel would face legal trouble, but with William S. lawyers, it would be just a bump in the road. We made a deal. He might think I was selling out, and maybe I was, but they took something irreplaceable from me. If I couldn't get justice legally, I'd get it another way. Rachel was less irreplaceable than I thought. I had a trip planned. I told him to tell David thanks for everything. I wouldn't be going back to work. I asked him what he would do. He said David spoke highly of Baxter Inc. Now that I was gone, they might need another engineer. They did things differently there, challenging, but without the corruption. The perks wouldn't match Rachel S. team, but it was honest work. I smiled in agreement. We exchanged a nod before parting ways without another word. Fast forward to Monday. I had just checked in for my flight to Costa Rica, anticipating relaxation in Tamarindo. Heading towards security, I spotted a mailbox. I pulled out an envelope addressed to the DOJ in Washington, D.C., containing a thumb drive with the recording. I thought it might intrigue them, considering William S. legal team might not be as unbeatable as they thought. I dropped the envelope in the mailbox and proceeded through security. 9 months later, seated at my usual table in a Costa Rican cafe, I received mail from Anna, who brought me my beer. I thanked her, raising the bottle. Holding the envelope, I wondered who had found me. Not making much effort to stay hidden, it still would take considerable resources to find me in this small Pacific coast town. My first thought was that William S. people had tracked me down. Letting the envelope sit for 2 days, I felt confident it wasn't a bomb. Still, one never could be too careful. I called out to the cafe owner, Carlos. I handed him the envelope and stepped back a few paces. Better safe than sorry, I thought. Carlos opened the envelope and handed it back to me. I thanked him, took another sip of beer, and emptied the envelope onto the table. Several sheets of paper fell out. The note on top read, "Thought you'd find this interesting, along with a phone number." It was from David. David would have the resources to find me. Flipping over another sheet, I found a newspaper article with a picture of Stephen, Michael, Rachel, and Olivia being led out of the CR building in handcuffs. The headline read, "4 indicted in multi-million-dollar procurement fraud." I smiled. Maybe William S. lawyers weren't as invincible as they thought, I mused aloud, a habit I'd picked up since my Spanish was weak and English wasn't widely spoken. I liked hearing English, even if it was just my own voice. I called for another beer, holding up my empty bottle. Anna brought it, and I thanked her as I accepted my beer, took a sip, and gazed out at the deep blue Pacific. Rachel.